Imagine you're playing this incredibly high-stakes game of chess. You've got your entire strategy mapped out, you know exactly what your knight and your rook can do, and you are totally ready to make your move.
Right, you're feeling confident.
Exactly. But while your hand is hovering right over the board, the squares just start to melt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the physical board literally turns into this fluid puddle, the pieces completely change shape, and suddenly the rules that you memorized like 5 minutes ago just no longer apply.
That is a terrifying visual.
It really is.
Oh.
And that dizzying, totally uncontrollable sensation, that is exactly what it feels like to be a leader right now. The old playbook is just dead. So today's deep dive is dedicated to decoding the new rules. We're looking at the future of leadership, influence, and power in the era of artificial intelligence.
And it's a completely disorienting landscape for most people. I mean, understandably, if you picture a map of the global economy or even international relations from the 20th century, it had hard borders.
Right, it was very static.
Exactly, it was static. But there's this sociologist, Zygmunt Bauman, who diagnosed our current era as the liquid future. Everything is just fluid, constantly shifting, and it's dissolving all those rigid, centralized structures we've relied on for decades.
Which is why we have a pretty brilliant stack of source materials to help us navigate this liquid terrain today. We are looking at the writings and some fascinating mentoring session summaries from Beata Mosór.
She's an incredible technology and strategy expert.
She really is. And she coaches the next generation of global diplomats. So our mission today is to extract her pillars of diplomatic leadership and basically figure out how this methodology, which was built for high-stakes international relations, can give you an unfair advantage.
Yeah, because you need one right now.
Absolutely. Because whether you are, stepping into a corporate boardroom trying to launch a startup or just figuring out your next career move, you are operating in this liquid reality.
And Mosór actually pairs Bauman's liquid future with another really important concept from Joseph Schumpeter, which is creative destruction.
Right, the economic theory.
Yeah. Schumpeter basically argued that new technologies don't just add to the economy, they incessantly destroy the old structures to build new ones. Like, in the past, if you were a corporate executive or a diplomat, your power mostly came from being a gatekeeper.
You sat at the top of a very sluggish vertical bureaucracy.
Exactly. Information just crawled its way up to you, and then your commands slowly trickled down.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because AI and decentralized tech have fundamentally destroyed that monopoly on information, haven't they?
Completely destroyed it.
I mean, a junior analyst today with the right AI prosting skills can synthesize more global data in 10 seconds than an entire department could in a month just 10 years ago.
Which means sluggish, top-down models are literally a death sentence for an organization today. If you try to govern a fluid network with a rigid hierarchy, you will simply perish.
And that sets up a massive problem for you listening. Because if the world is infinitely complex and information is totally decentralized, the old archetype of the well-rounded leader is suddenly obsolete. Mosór actually calls this the generalist trap.
Yeah, and it's a trap because being a generalist still looks like competence to the untrained eye. For generations, the ideal leader was someone who could speak a few languages, understand basic protocol, and just converse politely about a broad range of topics.
Without ever getting bogged down in the actual details.
Right, you just needed to be polished.
To put it in perspective, the generalist model is like bringing a Swiss Army knife to a complex surgical operation.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because it has a little blade, a little screwdriver, maybe a corkscrew. It feels like you are prepared for anything. But the problem today is that artificial intelligence can now do all of those basic functions.
Everything on that knife.
Exactly. An AI can translate the languages, it can write the standard protocol emails, and summarize the broad briefing documents. The only thing AI cannot do yet is perform the deep, highly specialized surgical cut.
And if you only possess the basic generalized tools, your role has essentially been automated.
Which is a scary thought.
It is. Mosór argues that a specialist with a deep technical understanding of, say, AI ethics, cryptography, or global migration policy is exponentially more valuable than a generalized manager.
Right, because vague diplomatic pleasantries don't really secure your interest when you're negotiating the actual algorithms governing international data flows.
But wait, I have to push back here.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't leadership by definition about managing the big picture? Like, if you are the conductor of the orchestra, how do you lead the symphony if you're stuck in the technical weeds playing the oboe?
That's a fair question. What's fascinating here is the distinction between doing the coding and speaking the language.
Okay, what do you mean by that? Well, Mosor isn't suggesting leaders need to sit down and write back-end software. She emphasizes the absolute necessity of a technical vocabulary.
So it's about fluency, not necessarily execution.
Exactly. Technology isn't an add-on anymore. It isn't a department down the hall that you call when your email breaks. It is the core infrastructure of modern power.
And if you don't understand the architecture of the system, you just can't govern it.
Exactly the point. Let's say you are making a policy decision about economic data privacy. If you don't understand algorithmic logic or what a database query in SQL actually does, you have zero leverage.
You're just blindly trusting the specialist beneath you.
Right. The engineers end up making the actual policy choices by default simply because you don't know enough to challenge them. And that isn't leadership, that's abdication.
Wow. Okay, so you drop the Swiss Army knife, you build a technical vocabulary and become a specialist. But that creates a massive new problem.
The coordination problem.
Yeah. Because if an organization is just a cluster of isolated technical specialists, how do they actually coordinate without a bureaucratic generalist managing them? Like, how do you get anything done?
Well, this is where Mosor's operational framework comes in to basically replace the traditional manager. She applies lean strategy to diplomacy in large organizations.
And we usually hear about lean in the context of Silicon Valley startups, right? Like building a minimum viable product, or MVP.
Yes, exactly.
You code a basic app, release it to users, measure the feedback, and fix the bugs as you go. So Mosor applies this to policy.
She does. She advocates for a minimum viable policy.
Okay, that's really interesting.
And to understand why this is so revolutionary, just think about how a traditional linear bureaucracy operates. Let's say a government or a massive corporation wants to tackle supply chain resilience.
Sure.
In a linear model, they form a committee. That committee spends 2 years drafting a comprehensive 500-page policy document behind closed doors. It costs millions of dollars.
And by the time they finally roll it out, the global market is completely shifted.
Exactly. The policy is totally obsolete on day one.
The team is burned out, the budget is drained, and they just have to start over. It's a system built on depleting assets.
Mosor counters this with what she calls the CIRC model, the circular operating model.
How did that work?
Instead of a massive multi-year linear project, you run small iterative sprints. A decentralized team of specialists launches a minimum viable policy in one specific area, and they gather immediate, real-world feedback.
But how does that actually look on a Tuesday afternoon? Like, what makes it circular?
So imagine that same supply chain team. Instead of drafting a mega document, they deploy a lightweight AI-driven tracking tool to just one local port for 30 days.
Okay, a 30-day sprint.
Right. The AI automates all the administrative reporting. The team captures the data, sees what failed, and immediately feeds those insights back into the next 30-day sprint. The knowledge and the talent are continuously reinvested into the system rather than depleted.
And the source material highlights a staggering metric here. Implementing this circular AI-led model can result in up to an 80% reduction in bureaucratic time and cost waste.
80%. It's massive.
Imagine getting 80% of your work week back because the AI is handling the administrative red tape and you are no longer sitting in endless committee meetings.
For you listening, if your team feels paralyzed by constant industry changes, it is almost certainly because they are trapped in a linear system trying to cope with a liquid world.
They're trying to freeze the water.
Exactly. Implementing these no-management principles, where the system itself guides the feedback loop, gives your team collective resilience, they can pivot without breaking.
Which leads us to the next massive hurdle. If you are sprinting through these decentralized 30-day experiments without a traditional manager looking over your shoulder,
Right.
how do you prove you are actually generating value? In a world full of information noise where every single person on LinkedIn is suddenly an expert, how do you cut through?
You have to replace subjective opinions with hard math. An evidence-based meritocracy is the only thing that actually cuts through all that noise.
The sources are really blunt about this. Trust in the AI era is built on facts, not headlines. Skepticism is just the default setting of the public and the boardroom.
It has to be.
Right.
Yep.
And Mosor actually provides a mathematical formula for proving your impact. I'm going to read it out, but then we definitely need to translate it.
Go for it.
The formula is S equals W1 times QN plus W2 times QL.
I know, it looks intimidating on a whiteboard, but it is deeply intuitive when you actually apply it.
Let's break it down. Think of it like calculating your credit score, but for leadership impact. S is your total strategic impact. To get that, you take your quantitative goals, the QN, and multiply them by a weight of importance.
Right.
Then you add your qualitative goals, the QL, also multiplied by their weight of importance.
And the quantitative side is pretty straightforward. I mean, you can easily count the size of your team, the scale of a budget, or the number of signed trade agreements. Those are just raw numbers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How do you mathematically quantify QL? Like, how do you put a hard, unarguable number on something as abstract as diplomatic sentiment or cultural influence?
Well, 10 years ago, you couldn't. You just guessed.
You just went off vibes.
Basically, yeah. But today, this is where specialized AI analytical tools become your absolute superpower. Mosór points out that institutions like the EDHEC Business School and the Krakow University of Economics are actively teaching leaders how to use AI to measure the immeasurable.
Let's ground this in a real example. How does an AI measure a vibe?
Take sentiment analysis. If you are a diplomat trying to gauge the mood of a host country regarding a new trade policy, you don't rely on a few conversations at an embassy dinner anymore.
Right, because that's just anecdotal.
Exactly. You deploy AI to ingest millions of local social media posts, public forums, and regional news articles in real time. Yeah. The AI parses the natural language and gives you a definitive metric. You can literally walk into a briefing and say, following our policy announcement, positive public sentiment in the manufacturing sector increased by 14.2%, while anxiety indicators dropped by 8%.
That's incredible. You are turning the qualitative atmosphere into undeniable data points.
Which entirely transforms how you build your professional portfolio. Mosór actually advises her diplomats to mercilessly strip adjectives from their resumes.
Just get rid of them entirely.
Yes, because in a liquid world, adjectives are just noise. You never write, I successfully contributed to a highly impactful international summit.
Because anyone can claim they were impactful. It really means nothing.
Instead, you use the formula. You write, delivered a $400 participant summit focusing on regional security, achieving a 90% stakeholder approval rating as measured by post-event biometric and sentiment analysis.
That is so much stronger.
You show the weight of the event, the quantitative scale, and the qualitative success. Precision is the ultimate flex in the modern economy.
So we have built a highly technical vocabulary. We have abandoned linear management for circular AI sprints. And we are mathematically proving our impact using sentiment analysis.
Sounds pretty comprehensive.
It does. It sounds incredibly efficient, but also, to be honest, a bit cold. It feels like we are charting a course to turn leaders into highly optimized robots.
I can see why it feels that way.
But that assumption completely misses the final and perhaps most crucial element of this entire framework. Because you can have all the AI tools and mathematical formulas in the world, but ultimately diplomacy, leadership, and business are about human beings interacting with human beings.
And this is the central paradox of the AI era. The more algorithmic and automated our operational infrastructure becomes, the more vital our deeply human psychological traits become.
There's a quote from Mosór in the sources that basically acts as the thesis for everything we've discussed so far. She says, modern diplomacy is technology dressed in values.
That's a great line.
Technology is just the engine, right? Human values are the steering wheel.
To navigate that, she advocates for leaders to deeply analyze what she calls their talent stack. She frequently uses the Gallup Strength Framework to help leaders identify their innate psychological advantages.
So instead of agonizing over your weaknesses to become a well-rounded generalist, you pour all your energy into the natural talents that AI just can't replicate.
Exactly. The sources highlight some specific strengths, like strategy, which is the human ability to look at a chaotic, melting geopolitical chessboard and intuitively spot the leverage points.
Or focus, which is the discipline to ensure a long-term initiative survives the volatility of short-term politics.
The sources also mention achiever, that kind of internal, restless drive to push a complex negotiation across the finish line. And then there's one of the most vital traits for a liquid world, which is significance.
I found that one fascinating. How does significance operate mechanically inside a team?
Well, a leader with the significance talent understands that human beings simply cannot sustain high performance on data alone. They need a narrative. When a crisis hits, say, a massive supply chain failure or a geopolitical conflict, and the team is panicking, a leader leaning on significance can contextualize all that chaos. They can say, the late nights we are pulling right now aren't just about moving numbers on a spreadsheet. Our work is actively stabilizing the energy grid for this entire region.
That narrative building is what actually generates collective resilience. because AI cannot provide meaning. Only humans can do that.
And that ties perfectly into the psychological reality of influence. Influence isn't just a byproduct of having the best data. It is deeply rooted in behavioral psychology.
The source materials explicitly connect Mosor's methodologies to the foundational work of social scientists like Robert Cialdini and Philip Zimbardo.
Yeah. Cialdini's entire framework of influence revolves around deeply ingrained human triggers, things like social proof, authority, and reciprocity.
So if you're conducting lean strategy for a nation or a brand, you are fundamentally pulling on those psychological levers. But, pulling psychological levers sounds awfully close to manipulation.
It can be a fine line.
Right. So how do you prevent a highly efficient AI-powered team from crossing the line from influence into unethical manipulation?
That is exactly where Mosór introduces a brilliant operational tool called values poker.
I love this concept so much. Walk us through how a game of values poker actually plays out in a boardroom.
Okay, let's imagine our decentralized team from earlier. They are about to launch a new, highly effective AI tracking tool that will monitor employee productivity.
And it will definitely hit their quantitative goal.
Oh, without a doubt. But before they deploy it, they sit down for values poker. It is a structured exercise where every team member is dealt a set of core values. Things like privacy, transparency, efficiency, autonomy.
Okay.
They literally have to play their cards to negotiate the ethical boundaries of the project. One team member might play the privacy card and argue that tracking keystrokes violates core human autonomy.
So they use the game to force a confrontation over ethics before the tech is ever launched.
Precisely. It builds a cohesive, shared moral compass. Because remember, they are operating in a circular, no-management sprint. They won't have a boss checking their daily work.
So the shared values defined during values poker become the invisible guardrails that keep the fast-moving team ethical.
Which is absolutely essential when you look at the sheer scale of Mosór's ambition. Her stated mission isn't just to write theory or coach a handful of elites. She is actively working to develop 1 million AI leaders.
1 million. That is a massive number.
1 million specialists who understand how to merge technological infrastructure with human values.
But you obviously cannot mentor 1 million people through traditional linear one-on-one coaching. The math just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. You have to apply the circular model to human capital as well.
And Mosór calls this recursive mentorship.
In a rigid hierarchy, knowledge is hoarded at the top. But in a liquid network, knowledge must flow continuously. Recursive mentorship dictates that the moment you master a new skill, say you finally figure out how to automate sentiment analysis, your immediate responsibility is to design a curriculum and teach the person coming up right behind you. You have to become the mentor you wish you had, instantly.
And the sources provide some really fascinating real-world examples of how young diplomats are executing this right now. They are actively seeking out highly specific knowledge from global experts.
They really are.
They're learning migration policy and democracy support from figures like Dr. Edomanas, or Gulf region security nuances from experts like Russia, and they are plugging into accelerators like Google Launchpad or the Tarno Mentoring Academy.
For you listening, maybe in a corporate role, the translation here is about deliberately engineering your relationship capital. These diplomats understand that when the geopolitical map redraws itself, their bureaucratic titles will just vanish.
The titles mean nothing in the liquid future.
Right. The only thing that survives the melting of the board is the peer-to-peer network they built.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the whole picture we've painted today, we are looking at a permanent paradigm shift. The era of the generalized manager hiding behind a bureaucratic title is just over.
It's done.
The future of influence belongs to the specialized, tech-literate, human-centric leader.
You can no longer rely on the static safety of an organization. You have to prove your value daily through specialized knowledge, agile execution, and measurable impact.
And we want to leave you with a concrete challenge today. Take a page directly from Mosor's playbook. Tomorrow, do 2 things. First, audit your own talent stack. Strip away the things you are mediocre at and identify the deep human strengths you need to double down on.
That's step 1.
Step 2, pick just one technical domain to master this quarter. Escape the generalist trap. Maybe you finally learn the underlying logic of large language models, or you figure out basic data querying. Just build your technical vocabulary so you can actually understand the room you are standing in.
I think the most important takeaway is that the liquid future is not a tragedy. It is simply a reality. It's a landscape waiting to be mastered. By focusing on what you can measure, iterating in small sprints, and anchoring everything in core human values, you become the calm center of the storm.
You provide stability to your team when the rest of their world feels chaotic.
Exactly. Stability amidst the chaos. That is the ultimate value of a leader today.
But before we officially wrap up, we want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, this is a good one.
We spent a lot of time today talking about the math of meritocracy, right? Building an undeniable evidence-based portfolio, replacing fluffy adjectives with hard numbers. The entire modern ethos is built on loudly and precisely communicating your measurable impact to prove your worth.
Because it's how you survive the noise.
Exactly.
Ugh.
But buried deep in the source materials, there is a fascinating, almost contradictory whisper of an idea. Mosór mentions that privacy itself is a strategic tool.
Especially when dealing with disinformation and this hyper-visible world of micro-influencers.
Right. In an era where every single person in your industry is desperately scrambling to publish every metric, every win, and every random thought on LinkedIn to prove they exist, could deliberate silence actually be your most terrifyingly effective asset?
It's an incredible question.
Is the strategic curation of what you choose not to share the ultimate power move?
It really flips the entire concept of influence on its head. I mean, when everyone else's cards are fully exposed on the table, the player holding their cards close to their chest controls the psychological tension of the entire game.
When the rules of the board game are constantly changing, maybe the strongest play isn't shouting about your strategy. Maybe it's letting your opponents wonder what kind of pieces you are actually holding. Think about that paradox of visible impact versus invisible leverage until our next deep dive.